In tonight's Tax Insider, there's a brewing brawl over tax reform. Last month, Congress passed dozens of tax breaks and a budget that will keep the government open through 2016. It will give lawmakers a break from fiscal fistfights during the presidential campaign season, but they're already gearing up for 2017. And for Insight, I'm joined now by Ryan Alexander, president of the non-partisan Taxpayers for Common Sense. Ryan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start with an article published in The Hill this week. Here's part of that article, quote, "While comprehensive tax reform will almost certainly not happen this year, both sides of the aisle think the undertaking could happen in 2017. And there is some talk, particularly in the House, of making international tax changes in 2016. Are you also skeptical about the chances for comprehensive tax reform in 2016?
Absolutely. It's a presidential election year, and you know, the Senate's in play, and all of the reasons to not do a huge change are in place. People are not in a position to actually pass, kind of negotiate over compromise and make a real deal. But absolutely, there will be groundwork done. People will work on this year.
Why should there be more optimism, or could there be more optimism for 2017?
Well, I think that if you talk to a Republican, they'd say, you know, what's going to be exciting is that in 2017 we may have a Republican president, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate, and that's what we need to get tax reform done. And if you talk to a Democrat, they'd say we may finally have, you know, a Democratic Senate and kind of clarity about the fact that we've had a Democrat in the presidency for 3 terms in a row, and it's time. The other issue is that there's consensus that this needs to be done. One of the few areas of agreement across the political spectrum is that the tax code's broken and needs to be fixed.
If there is this chatter in the House about international tax changes in 2016, what form could those changes take?
I think there's a bunch of things in play. There's been an idea to kind of create an international tax holiday to allow some of the trillions of dollars that are parked overseas to come back at a reduced rate, take that windfall and use it for infrastructure investment, which is something that's popular in an election year and a lot of people want to do. I think that's a short-term fix. I don't think that's a long-term fiscally sound solution. But I think the big issue of kind of should we go in a direction of territorial taxation where the money is taxed where it's earned, or a more global system, or is it really going to end up being a hybrid? I think that's not going to be resolved this year.
There's going to be a lot of positioning happening in 2016, especially on the presidential campaign trail. Give us a breakdown of how these battle lines might be drawn.
I think there's kind of 3 different ways to kind of divide people. There's a partisan divide where you're going to have Democrats arguing for an expansion of the earned income tax credit to maintain the essentially progressive nature of the income code and to make sure that we increase revenue through tax reform. There's a Republican kind of side of we have to reduce overall rates, reduce corporate taxation, and through kind of reducing taxes will spur growth and allow for enough revenue to come in. There's some regional differences about the deductibility of state and local taxes, where people in the Northeast want to make sure that their folks are protected, and you know, people in the South or Florida where there's no income tax, that's not a big issue for them. And then by sector, you know, retail, they pay almost the full marginal rate, whereas if some of the older industries like the oil and gas industries have lots of specific tax breaks that they're going to try to defend. So I think there's a lot of different ways that they're going to be battle lines drawn.
And as you mentioned, the regional issue, I was just talking with my father over the holiday break about the cost of living in different parts of the country are dramatically different.
Right. The regional differences are pretty significant. People in, you know, we all know from kind of those of us in Washington know there's a big difference between the number of federal dollars that come into the federal government from different states and go out to different states. So those lines become kind of more bright in a tax reform debate, and where people who live in very expensive parts of the country to live feel like they have a much heavier tax burden, they're going to feel like that's something that they want to see fixed.
It's a little dumbfounding to think about the fact that the tax code hasn't been streamlined in about 30 years, and that puts us way back in the Reagan administration. In 2013, then Senator Max Baucus and then Representative Dave Camp gave it a good try, but they failed to do so, like many before them. Why is this failing?
You know, I think there's a lot of different factors for why this is so difficult. I would recommend to your readers Showdown at Gucci Gulch, which is a story of how the '86 tax reform got passed. It's, despite its title and subject, actually kind of a page turner. But you know, we need leadership from the presidency. We need kind of agreement from key players in Congress that they are willing to work on this. And we have big ideological divides in Congress right now, even within the caucuses. There's a lot of disagreement. We saw that with the speaker battle in the fall. So there's lots of areas of real disagreement. This is going to be a difficult moment, even to bring people together. And we need to see leadership in the House, leadership in the Senate, and leadership from the president. So I'm hoping that we'll get there. But you know, we have, at this point, only a consensus on the fact that there's a problem.
Well, we see a lot of these waste reports published by members of Congress, like Senators Rand Paul and James Lankford, but those are not comprehensive tax reform proposals.
Right.
So in terms of leadership that you just mentioned, who is leading the charge? Is anyone doing this?
Well, you know, as you say, there's a lot of waste reports. Senator Flake just released one, The Farce Awakens, which, you know, is getting a fair amount of attention. And we're happy to work with anybody who looks for waste, either in the spending or the tax reform side. But I think where we're going to see leadership, you know, we have to see. I think that Speaker Ryan, this is an issue that's really important to him. He may try to get his chamber, his caucus, to kind of work on this in a serious way, but he also has to take kind of his new responsibilities as Speaker very seriously. He had, you know, he had been at Ways and Means, where he was going to have an opportunity to kind of push an agenda. I think on the Senate side, on the Democratic side, Senator Wyden has worked at this long and hard. Almost every year he's had a tax reform bill. I think there's a lot of interesting people who are trying hard to engage in this issue. You know, there's still a lot of divisions within the Republican Party. There's divisions within the Democratic Party. So there's, you know, there's room for a new leader to emerge, I guess, is what the real answer is.
Ryan Alexander, president of the nonpartisan Taxpayers for Common Sense. Thank you.
Thank you.